The Sol archive had not spoken in 3,000 cycles. Observer Archivist Tal drifted alone in the dim monitoring sphere, suspended in the gentle current of the Kethri zero-gravity chamber. Rings of ancient data glowed faintly around him, their light reflecting off the translucent membranes of his skin. The air carried the dry, metallic scent of long-dormant systems and filtered dust. Sol was a dead system, classified, sealed, and preserved only as a historical warning. A sterilized cradle. A mistake best remembered quietly. Then the silence broke. A sharp harmonic tone cut through the chamber, followed by another, and another, layered signals rising into a dissonant chorus. Tal froze, sensory filaments trembling. Across the projection field, ancient emergency beacons ignited one by one, their codes archaic, pre-archive, impossible. He magnified the source. Outer system. Port boundary. Something was moving. The darkness beyond Sol's edge began to ripple. Space bent and shimmered as mass signatures tore into real space. Not one vessel, but dozens, then hundreds. The display struggled to keep up as the count climbed into the thousands. Ships emerged like scars reopening in reality. Patched hulls, mismatched structures, propulsion systems centuries out of date and centuries overworked. No uniformity, no standardization. They looked less like a fleet and more like something built slowly, stubbornly, over generations. Then the external cameras resolved the markings. On every hull, burned deep into metal and composite, was the same image, a blue sphere cracked and blackened, surrounded by a ring of ash. Beneath it, written in multiple archaic scripts, were two translated words. We remember. The alert reached the Galactic Preservation Council within moments. Emergency session. Full assembly. Counselor Vesh arrived breathing fast, the faint scent of stress pheromones drifting from his species' skin. When the fleet images appeared, he went still. His voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. That symbol, it belonged to the Sol species. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Impossible. The humans had perished during the sterilization event, an unfortunate containment failure, officially recorded and archived. Then the sealed records opened. Quiet expansion purges. Risk-class civilizations. Preemptive removals. Earth had not been lost. It had been erased. Silence fell as the fleet's final formation locked into place around the dead star. No attack. No transmission. No demands. Just thousands of ships, scarred by time, engines idling, facing inward toward the ashes of their home. And then, across every galactic channel, the first human signal began to broadcast. Admiral Mara Aline stood in the quiet before the recording began, hands resting on the worn edge of the command table. The metal was smooth where generations of officers had gripped it during jumps, battles, and losses. The bridge lights were dimmed to power-saving levels, casting long shadows across consoles patched and repatched over centuries. Nothing on this ship had been new for a very long time. Through the forward viewport, Sol burned faint and distant, an old wound in the dark. A technician raised 2 fingers. Recording live. Mara inhaled slowly. Her voice, when it came, was steady but carried the weight of years not her own. We did not survive by hiding, she said. We survived by preparing. She paused, eyes drifting to the memorial wall along the bridge bulkhead. Thousands of names etched in layered plates, each generation adding more, never removing any. They thought extinction was an event, she continued. For us, it became a project. The transmission light blinked steady red. Across the fleet, millions would be watching. Some from ships older than the languages she spoke. Some from habitats grown out of salvaged hulls and asteroid shells. All of them descendants of people who had fled a burning sky. She felt the old feeling rise in her chest. Not anger. Not anymore. Responsibility. My name is Mara Aline, 4th Fleet, descendant of the Ark convoy. We remember Earth. We remember the fire. We remember the silence that followed. Her gaze hardened. And we did not spend 3,000 years waiting. We spent them learning how to come back. 3 decks below, the ship did what it always did, lived. In the agricultural ring, artificial sunlight spilled across rows of soil grown from centuries of compost, ash, and memory. Children knelt beside elders, pressing seeds into dark earth while a woman recited the old calendar. March, she said gently. Planting month, Northern Hemisphere. Earth climate zone temperate. A boy frowned. What's a hemisphere? The elder beside him smiled, wrinkled hands guiding his. Half a world, she said. One day you'll stand on one. Across the ring, a historian recorded the exchange. Nothing was too small. Language shifts, misunderstandings, rediscoveries. Everything went into the archive. Not a neural upload. Not a compressed data vault. Written, spoken, remembered by people. In the engineering decks, apprentices learned how to repair systems older than any surviving blueprint. A teenager traced wiring routes by hand, memorizing the ship's structure the way sailors once memorized coastlines. If the system fails, her instructor said, the diagram won't save you. Memory will. On another deck, a group gathered in a small chamber where the walls were lined with salvaged objects. A cracked ceramic mug, a child's shoe, a piece of scorched concrete sealed behind glass. Earth relics. A woman lit a small flame beneath them. Real fire, carefully contained. The room smelled faintly of smoke and oil. We do not keep these to mourn, she told the children. We keep them so forgetting never becomes comfortable. Up on the bridge, Mara closed her eyes briefly, listening to the ship's layered sounds, the hum of life support, distant laughter over comms, the rhythmic clatter of machinery that had outlived civilizations. We didn't preserve Earth, she thought. We preserved the people who remembered it. And that had been the difference. After the fall, the surviving fleets had scattered. There had been no central government left to command them, no world to unify them. Some ships drifted alone for generations. Others found each other slowly, cautiously, exchanging stories before resources. No one had ordered unity. It had grown. Every century, convoys gathered to exchange archives. Languages were compared. Histories synchronized. Cultural rituals voted on, argued over, kept, or discarded. Not efficiency, consensus. They didn't optimize humanity. They negotiated it. And over time, something strange had happened. Different ships evolved different customs, different accents, different technologies. But the core remained identical. The Day of Ashes, the naming of the lost, the promise of return. Mara opened her eyes as a data officer approached. Admiral, he said quietly, Council intercept analysis is complete. She gestured for the projection. Alien intelligence reports filled the air, confused, fragmented. No central command structure detected. Fleet composition inconsistent. Cultural variance high. Behavioral synchronization unexplained. Mara almost smiled. They were looking for a hierarchy. They had missed the ritual. Every ship, no matter how distant, observed the same remembrance cycle. Every child learned the same story before they learned mathematics. Every captain swore the same oath before taking command. Not loyalty to a government. Loyalty to a memory. And memory didn't require orders. She thought of her grandmother, who had been born in a rotating habitat built from mining equipment. Of the stories told at dim communal meals about oceans none of them had seen. Of the songs that changed melody over centuries, but kept the same words. We didn't stay human because it was efficient, she thought. We stayed human because it was difficult. Another report appeared. Alien analysts noted the presence of non-combat personnel across all major vessels. Agricultural units, education sectors, historical preservation teams, civilian population densities far above military norms. The conclusion was simple. Inefficient fleet design. Mara watched the projection fade and leaned back slowly. They didn't understand. This wasn't a war fleet. It was a civilization that had learned to move. And that was why it had survived. She activated the final segment of her broadcast. Across the fleet, and across the listening galaxy, her voice returned. We carry historians because memory is a weapon. We carry farmers because survival is strategy. We carry children because the future is not a resource. It is the mission. She paused, letting the words settle. For 3,000 years, we did not prepare for war. Her eyes fixed on the distant glow of soul. We prepared to remain ourselves. And that, she knew, was what the galaxy had truly failed to destroy. The Chamber of Continuity did not resemble a place where civilizations decided the fate of other civilizations. There were no raised voices, no banners, no displays of power. Instead, it was quiet, softly lit, temperature balanced for multi-species comfort, the air carrying a faint antiseptic scent of recycled purity. Order, stability, and predictability were considered the highest forms of mercy. Counselor Vesh took his assigned position within his species' environmental field, his translucent skin dimmed to a muted gray of professional restraint. Around him, the representatives of 47-member civilizations settled into their respective habitats: liquid spheres, low-gravity volumes, electromagnetic perches, neural immersion pods. At the chamber's center hovered the shared projection, Sol, surrounded by the human fleet. Thousands of ships. No formation aggression. No broadcast threats. Watching. A harmonic tone sounded. Voting session opened. Strategist Vorkel manifested as a tall, angular holographic construct, his physical body located elsewhere. His species favored distance, decision without emotional contamination. Agenda item: anomalous reemergence of classified extinct species, sole origin, Vorkel announced. Risk assessment phase 1. Data unfolded in layered spirals: fleet mass, energy output, logistical endurance estimates. Probability trees branched outward in calm, orderly patterns. Initial conclusion: Vorkel continued. Human behavior deviates from known galactic conflict models. Motivational structure appears historical emotional rather than resource strategic. A ripple of mild color shifts and pheromone releases moved through the chamber. Emotional motivation: primitive. The voting lattice appeared. Each counselor granted a fractional influence weight based on population, technological maturity, and historical stability index. Preliminary classification: containable anomaly, 62% observe only, 31% immediate neutralization, 7%. No alarm. No emergency powers invoked. The tone that followed was almost gentle. Proceed to contextual analysis. 3,000 cycles earlier, the galaxy had faced a different problem. Not war. Not invasion. Unpredictability. The quiet expansion doctrine had emerged gradually. After centuries of costly conflicts with emerging species that refused integration, rejected predictive modeling, or demonstrated nonlinear cultural escalation. The doctrine was simple: instability spreads. If a developing civilization crossed the risk threshold, rapid militarization, ideological volatility, expansionist unpredictability, it was removed quietly. No spectacle. No galactic trauma. Records sealed. Neighboring systems given revised historical data. Most species never knew it had happened. And because of that, peace endured. Archivist Node Carroll, representing a machine symbiotic civilization, projected the historical review into the chamber. Graphs replaced words. Conflict frequency before doctrine, high volatility. After implementation, near-zero large-scale war for 2 millennia. Civilization preservation requires early intervention, Carroll transmitted. Delayed response increases total suffering by an average of 4.7 planetary populations. Counselor Vesh shifted uneasily, but did not interrupt. Another projection followed. Earth, pre-sterilization. Population growth exponential. Weaponization capability accelerating. Cultural fragmentation index rising. Artificial intelligence development outside regulatory frameworks. Conclusion at the time: high-risk species with low compliance probability. Removal authorized. No one in the chamber had personally voted on it. Decisions that old were made by predecessor councils, guided by predictive governance AIs that calculated outcomes centuries in advance. The system had worked. Until now. Strategist Vorkel resumed control of the display. A new projection appeared. A probability curve extending 30 centuries into the past. No galactic civilization maintains unified operational intent beyond 400 standard years, he explained. Cultural drift, leadership turnover, technological transition, or environmental adaptation produce strategic discontinuity. The curve flattened. Human reemergence demonstrates continuous cultural objective over approximately 3,000 years. This is statistically anomalous to the point of theoretical impossibility. A counselor from a long-lived aquatic species pulsed curiosity through the shared sensory channel. Define objective. Vorkel paused. Return to origin system. Preservation of historical grievance. Coordinated fleet assembly. A longer pause. Possible revenge motivation. The chamber did not react with fear. It reacted with confusion. Revenge was inefficient. It consumed resources without strategic gain. Most species abandoned retributive psychology during early interstellar development, replacing it with outcome optimization algorithms or emotional dampening therapies. Counselor Wren of the Polity of Calm spoke next, their voice slow and measured. Have humans not integrated emotional regulation technologies? Negative, Vorkel replied. Cultural records indicate deliberate preservation of emotional intensity. A flicker of mild alarm passed through several delegations. Preservation, not mitigation? Another projection replaced the fleet imagery, cross-sections of human vessels. Civilian density high. Agricultural sectors embedded. Educational facilities. Historical archives physically maintained rather than neural compressed. Inefficiencies layered upon inefficiencies. They carry children, one counselor observed. Yes, Vorkel confirmed. Silence followed. That alone reduced their effective military capacity by measurable margins. The conclusion began to form across multiple species simultaneously. They were not optimizing for war. They were optimizing for identity, which meant their decision-making would not follow predictive logic, which meant they were irrational. The debate phase opened with a formal resonance tone. Influence weights adjusted dynamically as arguments began. Counselor Vesh spoke first. If their cultural continuity is emotional rather than strategic, then they may act unpredictably under perceived moral stimulus. We must prioritize communication before containment. Influence shift, plus 3%. Counselor Trell of the Efficiency Collective responded immediately. Emotional decision structures correlate with escalation risk. Preemptive disarmament should be considered. Influence shift, plus 5%. Strategist Vorkel intervened with a simulation. Human fleet engagement scenarios projected across the chamber. Outcome analysis. Direct conflict. Human defeat probability. 87% prolonged conflict beyond 50 cycles. Prediction failure threshold exceeded psychological contagion risk to member species. Unknown. That final variable caused the chamber's environmental systems to subtly lower sensory intensity. Unknown emotional exposure was considered a cognitive hazard. Counselor Carroll transmitted a recommendation. Humans represent low immediate military threat. Primary risk factor is mimetic and ideological. Recommend observational quarantine. Voting lattice updated. Observe and contain. 54% containable anomaly. 38% neutralization. 8%. Counselor Vesh felt a quiet relief ripple through his biochemistry. They were choosing patience. But across the chamber, another delegation requested speaking priority. Representatives from a species that had once undergone emotional dampening reform after a devastating civil war. Their speaker's voice carried a faint residual tremor, something most species no longer allowed. You classify them as irrational, the delegate said. But they maintained purpose for 3,000 years. That is not instability. A pause. That is commitment. The statement did not shift the vote. But the chamber grew slightly less certain. Strategist Vorkel closed the session with final classification. Humanity, emotional legacy civilization. High persistence, low optimization. Motivational drivers non-economic. He hesitated, a rare delay in his species' communication. Risk level, indeterminate. The final tone sounded. Session adjourned. Across the central projection, the human fleet still hung in silent orbit around the ashes of Earth. No threats, no movement, just waiting. And for the first time in 2,000 years, the Galactic Preservation Council realized their predictive models were not afraid of human weapons. They were afraid of what humans were willing to wait for. Cell had been trained to filter noise. Junior council aides did not react. They categorized, routed, prioritized. Emotion was inefficient in administrative cognition. But the first transmission from Sol did not behave like noise. It appeared simultaneously across restricted archival channels, historical verification networks, and civilian cultural streams. Not a hack. Not a brute force intrusion. The packet carried valid authentication keys, ancient ones, pre-doctrine, buried deep in legacy systems that no one had fully decommissioned. Cell watched the file unfold in her workstation sphere. Visual reconstruction, Earth orbital grid, 3,000 cycles prior. Timestamp verification, authentic. Source integrity, 99.997%. She expected propaganda. Instead, she saw evacuation ships burning in atmosphere. Cities darkening in synchronized grid collapse. A diplomatic transmission from Earth's final council repeating one message on all frequencies. We request clarification. There has been no declaration of conflict. Then the silence. The packet ended with a metadata tag Cell had never seen before. Quiet expansion purge authorization, level black. Her hands trembled over the interface. Within minutes, the same file began appearing on public channels. Then another. Then another. Different worlds. Different species. Similar patterns, sudden containment events, revised historical explanations, missing archival years. The galaxy had always trusted the record. Now the record was speaking back. Across the chamber of continuity, Counselor Vesh watched the influence lattice fracture in real time. Emergency session had been called, but half the delegations were already engaged in internal crisis management. Civilian networks were flooding with cross-referenced histories. Independent scholars were comparing timelines. Peripheral member states were requesting clarification on past anomalies. Strategist Vorkel's projection flickered at the center. Human activity assessment updated, he announced. Primary offensive vector. Informational destabilization. A supply network map replaced him. 3 long-range communication relays blinked red. No explosions. No debris fields. Just offline. Technical analysis scrolled. External maintenance requests spoofed. Security protocols overridden with legacy compatibility commands. Hardware failure induced through power cycling beyond tolerance thresholds. Human vessels had approached under civilian registry masks, executed the disruption, and departed before patrol response. Minimal damage. Maximum delay. Cell, now assigned directly to the crisis team, stared at the pattern forming across her tactical display. They weren't destroying infrastructure. They were creating friction. Supply routes began to desynchronize. Predictive logistics models, built on uninterrupted communication flow, started producing error margins. Fleet repositioning lag increased by 12%. Civil governance updates fell behind schedule. Nothing catastrophic. Everything slower. They're targeting our assumptions, Cell whispered. Nearby, a senior aide glanced at her. Clarify. Cell highlighted the overlapping timelines. They know our systems prioritize efficiency over redundancy. If they slow enough nodes, the whole network begins compensating. Compensation increases load. Load increases failure probability. The senior aide stared. Why not attack directly? Cell looked back at the Soul Fleet feed. Because this hurts more. In the outer systems, the human ship archive wind drifted past Relay Cluster 7 without broadcasting power signatures. Inside, the operations deck was quiet except for the soft click of manual input. Commander Luis Ortega reviewed the final checklist. Relay firmware rollback loaded. Loaded, the technician replied. Legacy compatibility patch? Confirmed. Ortega nodded. Execute. The relay did exactly what it had been designed to do thousands of cycles ago. Accept a maintenance command from an authorized historical key. It shut itself down for inspection. Estimated downtime, 18 hours. No alarms triggered. No combat response authorized. Ortega leaned back, exhaling slowly. Next target? The technician pulled up the list. Logistics node. Then civilian archive mirror. Ortega hesitated. Archive. Admiral's orders. Full purge disclosure synchronization. He nodded once. Make sure the civilian version gets the personal testimonies. This wasn't sabotage. This was sequencing. Back in the Council Administrative Core, Cell's personal channel lit up. Incoming message, family network. She opened it automatically. Her younger sibling's image appeared, skin patterns shifting rapidly in distress. Cell, is it true? The archives about the Terralin collapse. They're saying it wasn't a stellar accident. They're saying the Council ordered containment. Cell didn't answer immediately, because she had just seen that file, and the authorization signature matched. I don't know yet, she said finally, but the uncertainty tasted like acid. Across the chamber, voices rose, not shouting, but overlapping in urgent priority requests. Delegations were demanding access to sealed historical partitions. Several minor member states had suspended data sharing agreements pending verification of historical integrity. Influence weights fluctuated wildly. Trust, Cell realized, was a resource, and it was draining faster than any fuel reserve. Strategist Vorkel appeared again, resolution sharper, voice colder. Human fleet engagement probability remains low. However, systemic disruption is accelerating. A projection of the galactic network appeared, nodes shifting from green to amber. Current human strategy assessment. Narrative warfare combined with infrastructure latency induction. Counselor Vesh spoke quietly. They are forcing us to look at ourselves. Borkel did not respond. Instead, he displayed a timeline. Relay disruptions, increasing. Archive releases, scheduled at irregular but accelerating intervals. Civil unrest indicators, rising across 12-member systems. Projected system-wide instability threshold, 72 cycles. Cell stared at the number. 72 cycles until the galaxy stopped trusting its own past. On the Sol feed, the human fleet remained motionless. No expansion, no attack formations. Just thousands of ships, patient and silent. While their transmissions continued to spread outward, another archive release, another testimony, another reconstructed final message from a world that had disappeared without explanation. Cell felt something unfamiliar tighten in her chest. They weren't fighting the Council. They were counting. And the galaxy was the clock. Admiral Mara Aline studied the tactical projection without speaking. The Sol command deck was dim, lit mostly by the slow rotation of the fleet lattice hovering in the air before her. Thousands of ships, each tagged by origin convoy, structural age, fuel reserves, civilian density. The enemy overlays were cleaner, standardized Council patrol groups moving in predictable efficiency arcs, tightening a containment perimeter without yet committing to engagement. They're waiting for escalation, Tactical Officer Nguyen said quietly. Once we fire on a fleet asset, they'll classify us as active hostile. Mara nodded. That was exactly what the Council wanted. A clean transition. Emotional anomaly becomes military threat. Justification restored. Unity rebuilt. They need us to be the danger, she said. Operations looked up. Then what's the alternative? Mara expanded a second layer of the projection. Not fleet movements. Not weapon ranges. Communication networks. Archive mirrors. Civil data flows. Emotional regulation infrastructure nodes. They built a civilization that removes emotional volatility, she said. They didn't eliminate it. They buried it. She tapped the command surface. Task Group Echo will continue relay disruptions. Logistics desynchronization priority. No permanent damage. Another gesture. A new file appeared, sealed, heavy with layered encryption. And we begin phase memory. There was a pause across the deck. Not fear. Recognition. Nguyen spoke carefully. Admiral, once these deploy, there's no controlling the psychological spread. Mara's gaze returned to the distant glow of Sol. They erased us quietly, she said. We're going to make them remember loudly. She opened a fleet-wide channel. Authorization, memory bomb deployment. Target, command-level engagement systems, emotional dampening interfaces, decision support AIs. Her voice hardened. No fabrication. No manipulation. Only verified historical reconstruction. A beat. Let them feel exactly what happened. Fleet Commander Reth of the Preservation Enforcement Wing watched the human formation tighten on his tactical display. Standard doctrine suggested immediate suppression. His ships outmatched the nearest human cluster in firepower, shielding, and maneuver efficiency. Engagement simulations predicted a decisive outcome within 6 minutes. Yet High Command had issued conditional restraint. Observe. Classify. Avoid escalation. The human vessels approaching his patrol group looked irregular. Hull plating mismatched in color and density. External structures added without symmetry. Heat signatures varied wildly between ships. Inefficient, he thought. Then his sensor officer spoke. Commander, incoming transmission. Block external feeds. Negative. It's embedded in targeting telemetry. Reth frowned. Isolate. Too late. The display changed. The tactical grid dissolved, replaced by atmospheric visuals, dense cloud cover, electrical storm interference. Then resolution sharpened. A city. Primitive by Council standards. Dense. Lived in. Metadata scrolled. Earth. Final cycle. This is interference, Reth said. Purge the feed. But the system didn't respond. Because the data wasn't attacking the network. It was using it. The simulation shifted perspective, orbital view. Council sterilization platforms sliding into position. Energy arrays charging. Then audio. Not battlefield noise. Voices. Emergency broadcasts overlapping in multiple languages. Confusion. Requests for clarification. Civilian evacuation orders issued too late. Reth's neural interface registered the emotional layer automatically, his species dampeners translating the incoming data into controlled effect. Except the signal had been engineered to bypass dampening thresholds. The first sensation was pressure in his thoracic cavity, then heat behind his sensory membranes, then something his training files identified but had never personally experienced. Loss. The feed cut to ground level. A family sheltering beneath structural supports as the sky ignited. A child asking a question the translation engine rendered simply. Did we do something wrong? Reth's hand froze above the weapons authorization interface. Commander, his tactical officer said quietly, human ships are entering engagement range. Reth tried to respond. Instead, he replayed the final sequence. The city did not explode. It went silent. Lights out. Communications gone. Infrastructure dead. Extinction executed cleanly. Efficiently. Mercifully. His dampeners attempted to reassert control. The system flagged overload warnings. Commander, the officer repeated, voice tighter. Weapons authorization required. Reth looked at the human ships again. They were not accelerating. They were holding position, waiting for his decision. Across the engagement zone, the human vessel long memory drifted with engines at minimal output. Chief Engineer Salgado watched the Council fleet through a cracked external display frame. Shields at 72%, someone reported. Leave them, Salgado said. Don't normalize output. Let them see the fluctuation. Human ships didn't hide their imperfections. That was part of the strategy. Council targeting AIs optimized against predictable performance curves. Standardization made opponents easier to model. The human fleet had none. One ship's shields pulsed irregularly because the emitter grid had been rebuilt from mining equipment. Another vented excess heat through external radiators that changed thermal profile every few seconds. Propulsion systems varied by century and origin. Simulation chaos. Prediction failure. Commanders asking if we're ready for evasive, the pilot said. Salgado shook his head. Not yet. Their commanders still deciding. How do you know? Salgado tapped the sensor readout. Council targeting locks flickered, dropped, reacquired. Weapon capacitors charging, then discharging without firing. They're running emotional recovery cycles, he said. A faint smile crossed his face. First contact with grief is always messy. On the bridge of his flagship, Commander Reth finally lowered his hand from the firing interface. Stand down weapons, he said. There was silence. Then his tactical officer spoke carefully. Commander, human vessels remain within engagement parameters. I am aware. Reth watched the sensor feed. The human ships had not fired, had not advanced, had not even raised shield output to combat levels. They had delivered a memory and waited. His internal systems continued flagging abnormal cognitive load. Emotional dampeners were still struggling to stabilize baseline. Efficiency demanded engagement. Doctrine demanded containment. But another calculation, one no algorithm had prepared him for, kept interrupting. If they had suffered this, what would we have done? Hold position, he repeated. Across the tactical network, multiple Council ships mirrored the command. No shots fired. In the quiet between fleets, something far more dangerous than weapons began to spread. Understanding. The alert reached the sole command lattice without warning priority, because the Council transmission didn't read like an attack. It read like a containment notice. Admiral Mara Aline watched the decoded packet unfold across the projection. High-level authorization signatures, Preservation Council credentials, the language formal and restrained. Stability enforcement measure, regional risk neutralization. Target classification, high volatility human expansion nodes. Objective, prevent ideological spread beyond containment threshold. Below the text, a trajectory line appeared. 3 human refugee systems. Civilian heavy. Agricultural habitats. Archive centers. Weapon designation, stellar induction array. Effect, controlled star destabilization. Casualty projection, total. They think they're preventing escalation, Nguyen said quietly. Mara didn't answer. Because the signatures were real. This wasn't a rogue faction. This was a Council emergency vote triggered by rising instability metrics across the galaxy. Human memory broadcasts. Archive releases. Council fractures. Civil unrest. In their logic, the humans weren't winning. They were spreading systemic chaos. And chaos, in Council doctrine, was extinction-level risk. Intercept window? Mara asked. 42 hours before array deployment reaches first system. How many civilians? 8 million across 3 systems. The bridge fell silent. For 3,000 years, humanity had prepared for the return. Not for this. Fleet-wide order, Mara said at last. Her voice was steady, but something inside it had hardened. All combat groups redeploy to civilian defense. Priority, evacuation and shield saturation. Nguyen hesitated. Admiral, that leaves Seoul exposed. Mara looked at Earth's dead light beyond the viewport. We didn't come back to watch it happen again. Across the fleet network, the formation broke. The Vengeance fleet, ships optimized for pressure on Council infrastructure, peeled away from Seoul orbit and accelerated toward the refugee systems. To the Council observers, it looked like escalation. To the humans, it was rescue. The misunderstanding would cost them both. The first refugee world was not a world at all. It was a lattice of habitats orbiting a dim red star, rings of farms, archival stations, and clustered residential cylinders grown over centuries from salvaged hulls. Children floated in school corridors when the alert sounded. Evacuation protocols began immediately, but the array was not a projectile that could be outrun. Stellar induction worked at the source. The only defense was absorption. Human ships arrived in waves, engines burning hot enough to scar their own hulls. They didn't form battle lines. They formed a shell. Civilian habitats at the center. Fleet units locking shields together, overlapping fields, rerouting power from life support, propulsion, anything that wasn't essential to survival. Engineer Salgado's voice echoed through the long memory. Shields to 110%. Dump thermal into exterior plating. That'll melt the outer layers. Then we'll grow new ones later. Across the defensive network, older ships began to fail first. Emitters centuries past design tolerance overloaded, power grids cascading into darkness. Each time one went, another ship slid into the gap. No orders needed. Memory did the coordinating. Inside Habitat Ring 3, Tomas Aline watched through a reinforced observation panel as the star flickered, subtle shifts in brightness, unnatural oscillations. The Council wasn't trying to destroy the habitats directly. They were trying to turn the sun against them. Around the ring, people worked in silence. No panic. This had been practiced for generations. Evacuation drills, archive backups, population redistribution. But this time, Tomas saw something different in the younger faces. Not fear. Resentment. They did this because of us, a teenager said near him. Because we pushed too hard. Another voice answered. Good. Now they know we're dangerous. Tomas turned. You don't mean that. The boy met his eyes. We came back for revenge, didn't we? The words spread faster than the evacuation notices. Across the civilian networks, arguments erupted. If we hadn't exposed them, they wouldn't be attacking. If we stop now, Earth stays erased. If we keep going, we lose everything again. Meanwhile, another misunderstanding unfolded far away. Council sensors watched the human fleet mass around the refugee systems, energy output spiking, ships arriving from Seoul at emergency burn. To strategist Vorkel's models, the pattern resembled pre-assault staging. Human evacuation traffic looked like population consolidation. Shield saturation looked like energy weapon charging. Probability update. Human counterstrike imminent. The Council accelerated the array deployment. The weapon fired earlier than planned. And at Seoul, a third misunderstanding took shape. A portion of the human fleet, ships that had lost family during the first defense wave, refused redeployment orders. Their commanders transmitted a simple message. If we keep defending, they'll keep targeting civilians. Ended at the source. They began plotting a direct strike toward Council core infrastructure. The fleet split. Preservation fleet. Vengeance fleet. For the first time in 3,000 years, humanity did not move as one. The report reached Admiral Mara Aline as the first refugee system's defensive shell collapsed under stellar flare pressure. Civilian casualties, minimal. Fleet losses, catastrophic. 32 ships gone. 50 more non-operational. Power reserves across the defensive line dropping into critical ranges. Nguyen spoke quietly. Vengeance fleet has broken formation. They're accelerating toward Council space. Mara closed her eyes. If they strike now, she thought, the Council will activate full extinction protocol. Earth will die a second time. Not physically. Morally. Admiral, Nguyen added, voice tight. Fleet historian Tomas Aline is requesting priority channel. Says it's non-archival. Mara accepted. Tomas appeared on the display, background lit by emergency lighting, faces moving behind him as evacuation continued. He didn't salute. Admiral, he said, voice steady despite the chaos. I'm sending you the civilian sentiment analysis. The data streamed in. Support for defensive operations, high. Support for continued escalation, rising sharply among younger generations. Support for total retaliation, increasing fastest among recent lost groups. Tomas held her gaze. They're not remembering Earth anymore, he said. They're remembering anger. Mara didn't answer, because she had seen the same trend. Tomas leaned closer to the camera. If we become what they feared, he said quietly, Earth truly dies. Behind him, the star flared again. And in the fleet network, the distance between Vengeance Fleet and Preservation Fleet continued to grow. The system designated Stability Anchor 12 had never been meant to see war. Counselor Vesh stared at the tactical projection as the emergency session opened, his skin flushed with a pattern he could not fully suppress. The anchor was not a fortress, not a military hub. It was a control lattice, a ring of massive induction arrays built around a white dwarf, the same class of weapon that was even now destabilizing human refugee stars. Population, 3.2 million. Engineers, families, archive staff, children, and approaching fast, human signatures. Multiple fleets, mixed configurations, some matching the breakaway Vengeance Fleet. Others, unexpectedly, bearing Preservation Fleet identifiers. Strategist Vorkel's voice cut through the chamber. Human forces entering weapons range in 17 minutes. Probability of anchor destruction, 94%. Vesh's breathing slowed deliberately. Evacuation status? Civilian transport capacity insufficient. Estimated evacuation completion, 11 hours. They would not make it. On the display, human ships accelerated, engines burning hard enough to leave ion scars across the system. For the first time, Vesh felt what the humans had been transmitting. Helplessness. Admiral Mara Aline stood on the forward deck as the anchor filled the viewport. The structure was immense, concentric rings studded with induction emitters, power cores bright as miniature suns. Around it clustered civilian habitats, orbital platforms, transport lanes jammed with traffic. And behind her, on the tactical overlay, the breakaway Vengeance Fleet closing from a different vector. If they fired first, the anchor would die instantly, along with everyone living around it. Time to Vengeance Fleet weapons lock. Mara asked. 6 minutes, Nguyen replied. And council evacuation? Minimal. They didn't expect us to come here. Mara exhaled once. Then she opened a fleet-wide channel. All human vessels. This is Admiral Aline. New priority. Civilian extraction. Anchor population becomes protected class. There was a beat of stunned silence. Then voices erupted across the command net. Admiral, those are council personnel. They're operating the weapon that's killing our worlds. Extraction capacity is insufficient. Mara cut through the noise. We remember what it feels like to lose a world, she said. We will not give that to anyone. She switched channels. Open broadcast to Vengeance Fleet. The response came immediately, tight, angry. You're protecting the people who tried to wipe us out. I'm protecting the people who didn't vote, Mara replied. Stand down, or you'll be firing through civilian zones. A long pause. Then the Vengeance commander answered, voice low. You have 4 minutes. Human ships broke formation and dove. Not toward the weapon, toward the habitats. Transport bays opened. Civilian corridors lit. Automated guidance systems flooded council networks with emergency docking protocols in every major galactic language. At first, the alien traffic control systems rejected the intrusion. Then the humans bypassed them. Legacy compatibility keys. Maintenance overrides. Emergency authority codes buried deep in infrastructure older than most council civilizations. Because humans had spent 3,000 years studying systems. And systems always remembered their past. The first alien transport pilot hesitated only seconds before following the guidance vector into a human carrier. Inside the bay, atmosphere was already adjusted. Gravity matched. Medical teams waited. No restraints. No weapons. Just evacuation lines. Across the system, the pattern repeated. Human ships positioning themselves between habitats and the incoming Vengeance fleet firing arcs. Shielding overlapping. Power drains climbing into dangerous ranges. The cost came quickly. One older human cruiser took a near miss from an induction feedback surge. Its patched shield grid collapsed, hull sections venting to vacuum. It held position anyway. Another vessel overloaded its reactors trying to maintain a mass-field corridor for evacuation traffic. The ship went dark, drifting, its final act preserving a transit lane. On the tactical display, Nguyen's voice tightened. "Admiral, we're losing ships." Mara didn't look away from the evacuation counters. "Keep the corridor open." Behind the civilian shell, Vengeance fleet targeting locks flickered. Their commander came back on the channel. "You're burning half our operational capacity to save them." "Yes." And when the anchor fires again, Mara finally turned toward the weapon structure. "Then we make sure it never fires again." Evacuation percentage climbed. 30%. 50. 72. When the number crossed 80, Mara gave the order. "Strike teams, precision engagement. Disable power cores only. No structural cascade." Human attack craft surged forward, threading between evacuated habitat rings. Instead of saturation fire, they targeted the anchor's energy spine, junction points, transfer nodes, thermal regulators. The weapon fought back. Defensive batteries tore through several attackers, debris scattering across the system. But the humans didn't aim to destroy the station. They aimed to suffocate it. Power output dropped. Induction arrays flickered. Then, one by one, the massive rings went dark. At 87% civilian evacuation, the anchor died. Not in an explosion. In silence. Counselor Vesh watched the final telemetry with hands trembling. Civilian survival estimate, 2.9 million. Human losses, severe. Multiple capital ships destroyed or abandoned. Operational capacity across preservation fleet reduced by nearly 40%. And the humans were withdrawing. No occupation. No demands. Just a broadcast, transmitted system-wide and across all council channels. Admiral Mara Aline's face filled the chamber. "We remember what it feels like to lose a world," she said. Her voice was tired, not triumphant. "We will not give that to anyone." The transmission ended. In the tactical network, something unprecedented happened. Council military commanders began issuing independent orders. Weapons safeties engaged. Pursuit canceled. Engagement protocols suspended. Fleet Commander Reth's signal appeared among the first, refusing further combat operations against human forces. One by one, other commanders followed. Not rebellion. Recognition. In the chamber of continuity, Vesh understood the shift spreading through the military network. The humans were no longer just dangerous. They were something worse. A force willing to absorb loss to save their enemies. A civilization that remembered suffering and refused to pass it on. Efficiency could calculate power. Predictive models could estimate aggression. But nothing in the Council's history could contain an opponent whose strategy was moral restraint. Vesh looked at the darkened projection of the destroyed anchor. The galaxy had feared human revenge. Now, at last, he understood the real threat. Humans did not want vengeance. They wanted no one, ever again, to feel what had been done to them. The silence after Stability Anchor 12 spread farther than the battle had. Across Council space, military traffic slowed. Weapons remained powered but unfired. Patrol formations held distance from human corridors, their targeting grids active but intentionally wide. No one wanted to be the first commander to trigger another decision like the one that had just cost millions of lives and saved millions more. In Sol orbit, the human fleet did not celebrate. Admiral Mara Aline moved through the casualty deck of the Long Memory, the air heavy with sterilizers and the faint metallic scent of overheated systems. Rows of sealed medical pods lined the corridor. Some were occupied, some were not. Fleet status scrolled quietly across her implant. 38 capital ships lost. 92 crippled beyond immediate repair. Civilian preservation success rate, 96.4%. Victory, by any historical military metric. But the fleet moved like survivors, not conquerors. Salvage crews worked continuously, cutting usable sections from dead ships. Agricultural rings redistributed population to compensate for lost habitat volume. Archive teams recorded every loss, every name, every decision point. Nothing was framed as sacrifice. Everything was recorded as cost, because that was the only way memory stayed honest. At the edge of Seoul, Council observation vessels maintained distance. They watched as human engineers rebuilt shield grids out of 3 different ship classes. They watched damaged hulls patched with mining plates, civilian bulkheads, even sections of former habitation rings. Standard fleets replaced losses. Human fleets adapted around them. The war had not broken them. It had reshaped them. And that frightened the Council almost as much as their restraint. The Chamber of Continuity convened in full emergency session for the first time in 900 cycles. This time, the central projection did not show a battlefield. It showed the Purge Directorate archives. Councillor Vesh stood with 2 others at the chamber's center while the sealed partitions opened one by one. Authorization records, risk assessments, outcome projections, species classifications marked removed. The number climbed slowly. Some delegations emitted low distress frequencies. Others remained perfectly still, their emotional regulation systems struggling to categorize what they were seeing. Archivist Node Carroll spoke first. Predictive models indicated total conflict reduction of 83% following implementation. Councillor Wren answered quietly. Conflict was reduced because the opposing populations no longer existed. Silence settled. Then a new presence entered the chamber, not physically, but through the shared projection network. Admiral Mara Aline appeared without military insignia, standing in what looked like a shipboard conference space. Behind her, the wall carried no weapons display. It carried names. Rows and rows of them. "We didn't come here to replace the Purge Directorate," she said. Her voice was calm, but the exhaustion behind it was visible. "We came because it already existed." She stepped aside. A technical overlay appeared. Human fleet deployment patterns across Council space. Not concentrated around political centers. Around risk zones. Unstable stars. Resource conflicts. Border tensions between minor civilizations. Regions where predictive models showed rising extinction probability due to war, environmental collapse, or containment actions. "We're not asking for control," Mara continued. "We're proposing a system." The overlay expanded. Human oversight fleets operating as mobile monitoring and intervention units. Their function: evacuation support, conflict mediation, infrastructure stabilization, and, if necessary, physical obstruction of extinction-level actions by any party. "We call it the Charter of Non-Extinction," she said. A second layer appeared, technical demonstration footage. Human ships deploying rapid habitat construction modules around a failing mining colony. Emergency agricultural seeding using engineered soil cultures. Mass shield projection used to divert a comet from a populated system. And one final clip. Human ships interposing themselves between 2 Council fleets during a border dispute. Power diverted entirely to shielding, weapons offline. "We enforce one rule," Mara said. "No species gets erased. Not by war. Not by policy. Not by efficiency calculations." She met the chamber's gaze. "If you want stability, we'll help you build it. But extinction is no longer an acceptable solution." There was no threat in her voice, which made the proposal heavier than any ultimatum. The voting lattice appeared. For the first time, influence weights fluctuated wildly, not from political maneuvering, but from emergency consultations flooding in from member worlds. Council military commands submitted independent reports. Engagement refusal rates against human forces had reached 63%. Civilian populations across multiple systems had begun requesting human mediation in local conflicts. Survivor delegations spoke next. A representative from a minor species whose historical record showed a population collapse event stood forward. "We found our missing years in the Human Archive release," she said. "Our world wasn't saved by the Council. It was corrected." Her gaze shifted to Mara's projection. "You offered to station a preservation flotilla in our system. Without governance authority. Without resource claims." She hesitated. "We accept." That single statement shifted the lattice. Other delegations followed, not out of trust alone, but out of recognition. The humans had demonstrated something the Council had never optimized for. Intervention without absorption. Protection without control. Counselor Vesh initiated the formal motion. Resolution 9 to 441. Dissolution of the Quiet Expansion Purge Directorate. Full archival disclosure of all containment actions. Adoption of the Charter of Non-Extinction under Joint Council. Human oversight. The chamber dimmed for the vote. One by one, influence fields shifted. Approve, 71%; reject, 12%; abstain, 17%. The approval threshold passed. The Purge Directorate, 2,000 years of policy, ceased to exist. A public broadcast followed immediately. For the first time in galactic history, the Council acknowledged the extermination of Earth and did not call it necessary. From a civilian observation platform orbiting a minor trade world, a survivor representative watched the human fleet pass through their system days later. The ships did not arrive in formation. They moved in uneven clusters, some visibly damaged, some carrying external agricultural modules, others towing half-repaired hulls behind them. Not conquerors, caretakers. But the representative noticed something else. Every ship bore the same symbol, a burned blue world. And beneath it, in translated script, "We remember. Guardians," she thought. And warning, because the humans had not defeated the galaxy. They had made it remember what it had done. The designation came from the Council's logistics registry, but it spread because civilians liked the sound of it. Ash Wardens. Across the major transit lanes, human fleets no longer moved as a single armada. They dispersed, small task groups stationed at instability thresholds, migration corridors, disputed borders, failing systems where predictive models once would have quietly prepared containment options. Now the response protocols looked different. Evacuation staging, resource buffering, third-party mediation requests. At a mining dispute on the edge of Council space, 2 local defense flotillas maneuvered aggressively for orbital control, until a human carrier translated between them and powered its shields outward, projecting a neutral corridor wide enough for both sides to see the message. No weapons locks, no demands, just a ship large enough to make escalation physically difficult. The standoff lasted 9 hours. Then negotiations began. Elsewhere, Ash Warden engineers reinforced a failing climate array around an ocean world that had refused Council intervention for centuries. In another system, a human archive vessel arrived before any age ship, not with supplies, but with portable recording units and cultural historians. "Before we help rebuild," the lead historian explained through translation, "we preserve what you don't want lost." Not every world welcomed them. Some governments filed formal objections to emotional interference. Others resented the silent judgment implied by the burned blue symbol on human hulls. And some Council strategists noted a troubling trend. Conflict frequency had dropped, but when violence did occur, populations now resisted evacuation orders more strongly. Memory, it turned out, made people stubborn. The Ash Wardens accepted that as part of the cost. The larger change came slowly, and not through policy. It began in schools. On a temperate moon orbiting a minor trade hub, a classroom of 6 species sat in a shared learning sphere while their instructor dimmed the environmental lighting. Today's history module, the instructor said, is a cultural memory event. The projection did not show fleet movements or Council resolutions. It showed a shoreline, wind moving through grass, waves breaking against rock. The sound layer included distant birds, recorded centuries before extinction. Earth. A human cultural liaison stood quietly at the edge of the classroom, watching as the children experienced the reconstruction. Afterward, one of the aquatic students pulsed a question through the translation field. Why did they keep this? It is inefficient to store environments that no longer exist. The instructor gestured toward the human. The liaison knelt, adjusting the translation settings. Because forgetting makes it easier to do again, she said. The student considered that for several seconds. Then Earth is not gone, it concluded. The liaison smiled faintly. No, she said. It's not. Across the galaxy, similar programs appeared. Emotional context layers added to historical archives. Personal testimony stored alongside statistical summaries. Council archivists began consulting human historians on how to preserve subjective experience without compromising data integrity. Not all species adopted the practice, but enough did that a new classification entered the cultural index. Memory risk civilization, a society whose identity included active emotional preservation of historical loss. The number of such civilizations was growing. The first soil shipment arrived at Nova Terra in silence. From orbit, the planet still looked raw. Thin atmosphere, wide mineral plains, oceans only beginning to stabilize under controlled seeding programs. Terraforming drones moved across the continents in precise geometric patterns, adjusting pressure gradients and chemical balances. But at the primary landing zone, the work was being done by hand. Admiral Mara Aline, no longer fleet command, now listed simply as settlement coordinator, stood beside a long row of sealed containers. Each bore a label: Amazon Basin, Himalayan Loam, Midwestern Prairie, Sahara Edge, Pre-Desert Expansion, Garden Soil, Residential Zone 441B, Preserved Samples, some only grams. All that remained of ecosystems that no longer existed anywhere else. Around her, settlers opened the containers carefully. The soil inside was darker than the surrounding regolith, richer, holding a scent the planetary sensors couldn't classify, but every human present recognized immediately. Home. Children knelt first, pressing their hands into it. An Ash Warden shuttle touched down nearby, its hull still bearing scorch marks from the anchor operation. The crew disembarked without ceremony and joined the line, passing containers, mixing old Earth soil into the prepared growth beds. No speeches, no declarations, just work. As the first seeds went into the ground, a transmission arrived from orbit. Not military, not council, a request. A minor species on the far edge of known space had experienced a catastrophic habitat failure. Population survival projected at 62% with immediate intervention. Mara looked at the message for a long moment. Then she forwarded it to the nearest Warden task group with a single line attached. They need help. Send historians too. Above Nova Terra, the Ash Warden fleet adjusted its patrol routes. Below, the first Earthborn plants began to grow in alien light. The planet would take centuries to become fully habitable. The work would never really be finished. But that was the point. Humanity had come back for vengeance. Instead, they had built something slower, something harder. A civilization that refused to let any world, its own or anyone else's, disappear without being remembered. And across the galaxy, more and more species were beginning to understand that the most powerful thing the Ash Wardens carried was not their fleets. It was the promise that if the worst ever happened,